Regrettably, the most important person on the ground at the Capitol on January 6, besides the patriots who died, was John Earle Sullivan. This is his story according to Wikipedia, but we'll correct a few discrepancies in the end. John Earle Sullivan, born July 18, 1994, also known as Activist John, is an American political activist and self-identified photojournalist who participated in the 2021 United States Capitol attack. Other names: Jaden X-activist John. Before the January 6 attack, Sullivan organized and participated in protests relating to the Black Lives Matter (BLM) movement, though a few other BLM organizers explicitly disavowed him, even expelling Sullivan from rallies and warning fellow activists to avoid associating with Sullivan. On January 6, Sullivan entered the Capitol and accidentally broke a window. He repeatedly shouted encouragement to fellow rioters. Sullivan captured footage of the attack, his own interactions with law enforcement, and the shooting of Ashley Babbitt. After Sullivan participated in the Capitol attack, Rudy Giuliani accused Sullivan of being affiliated with Antifa, despite having no evidence of any association. Federal authorities also did not identify him as such, and he has stated that he has no relationship to the Antifa movement. By May 2021, Sullivan faced 8 charges for his involvement in the January 6 events. Early life and family: Sullivan was adopted into a conservative Latter-day Saint family. His father, John Sullivan Sr., was a lieutenant colonel in the U.S. Army. Sullivan has 3 younger brothers. Sullivan grew up in Stafford, Virginia. Around 2013, the family moved to Utah. After graduating from high school, Sullivan applied to be a police officer. Sullivan got involved in speed skating, and in 2016, Sullivan was featured in a commercial blog post on Uber's site, describing him as searching for a way to earn money that fit with his busy training schedule. Sullivan participated in the 2018 Olympic trials but failed to qualify. Despite this, he has claimed to have competed in the 2018 Olympic Games. Activism: prior to the 2021 Capitol attack in June 2020, Sullivan began to attend Black Lives Matter (BLM) protests. According to Lex Scott, the founder of Black Lives Matter Utah, none of the activists knew him before this time. Civilized Awakening and Insurgents USA conservative activist James Sullivan, John's brother, reports that John was conservative. Until recently, James Sullivan founded Civilized Awakening, part of the greater far-right patriot movement. In June 2020, better source needed. John Sullivan founded Insurgents USA, a group participating in protests against police violence. Sullivan was accused of exploiting the racial justice movement for self-gain. The Salt Lake Tribune observed that Sullivan had been selling merchandise and indulging in self-promotion on many websites. His Insurgents USA website sells protest-related gear, such as black clothing, gloves, and gas masks, branded Block Gear Collective. Car protest, shooting and arrest. On June 29, 2020, Sullivan led his first protest event in Provo, Utah. BLM leader Lex Scott recalled, his very first protest he held was the one someone got shot. The event was a counter-protest against a pro-police event where a Back the Blue group drove vehicles driving around the Provo police station. Meanwhile, Sullivan and others organized a counter-protest blocking vehicles and interfering with traffic on a busy street. One man affiliated with Sullivan, Jesse Taggart, was charged with attempted murder for shooting and injuring a driver who had slowly moved through the crowd of protesters. The shooting victim was not affiliated with either protest group. Sullivan was arrested and charged with rioting, making a threat of violence and criminal mischief. According to a police affidavit, Sullivan damaged vehicles and cooperated with Insurgents USA to recruit protesters for a protest. Sullivan indicated that he thought the driver Taggart shot was trying to run over protesters, a claim police disputed based on video evidence of the event. Ties to Proud Boys: Sullivan organized events in Provo, Utah, that were controversial with BLM. Sullivan experienced greater skepticism after a July 1, 2020, event where he invited speeches from the Proud Boys, an American far-right, neo-fascist organization that promotes and engages in political violence. Sullivan's close relationship with the Proud Boys led to BLM activists refusing to work with him. Sullivan later got his group firearms training. On September 26, Sullivan's brother James had addressed a Proud Boys rally in Portland on behalf of James's far-right group Civilized Awakening. Criticism for armed protest. On July 22, 2020, Sullivan held a solo, armed protest at the Utah State Capitol, carrying an AR-15. The protest lasted a few hours, during which he was confronted by 20 armed men from Utah Citizens Alarm. As he began carrying assault rifles to protest, this invited hostility from both the right and the left. In August 2020, Sullivan was filmed giving a speech outside the U.S. Capitol. Sullivan spoke of burning this shit down, and told the crowd, "We gotta rip Trump out of that office right over there," while pointing to the White House. He added, "We ain't fucking waiting till the next election." Lex Scott said that Sullivan seemed to have a death wish, as he thought it would be cool or amazing if he was killed at a protest and it started a revolution. She has also denied Sullivan is a member of BLM Utah and expressed suspicions of his seeking fame, adding he never attended any BLM meetings nor worked alongside them to advance their agenda. Work with Jade Sacker. According to James Sullivan, by October 2020, better source needed. He and his brother John were subjects of a documentary being filmed by Jade Sacker. Sacker reportedly used 2 teams to document the brothers' efforts. Better source needed. Sacker would later accompany John Sullivan into the Capitol on January 6. Denounced and expelled. An activist from Portland warned people not to trust him, after he managed to get local activists arrested in September 2020 by leading them down a wrong route and into a police kettle. Sullivan was widely suspected of being a double agent working for law enforcement. In Signal chat groups, Sullivan would use various sock puppet accounts to create against the illusion that others were defending the reputation of John Sullivan. Labor activist Talia Jane said Sullivan is reviled throughout the activist space. On September 16, James Sullivan and Civilized Awakening held a counter-protest against BLM. James brought a bodyguard to a BLM protest. That individual was arrested on charges of brandishing a firearm. On November 26, 2020, Seattle activists published a memo accusing John Sullivan of being an agent provocateur seeking to undermine the Black Lives Matter movement. John has been kicked from the hashtag Salt Lake City and hashtag Portland protest scenes due to alarming behaviors including grifting, profiteering, self-promotion, clout chasing, sabotage of community actions, threats of violence, and, maybe most disturbingly, ties to the far right. John's brother, James, is the co-founder of a pro-Trump org called Civilized Awakening, and has strong ties to Proud Boys, even having spoken at a Proud Boy rally. The brothers' polarized political stances conveniently bolster the other's public personas. Activists in these cities recommend that he be barred from community actions and totally avoided. On December 12, pro- and anti-Trump activists traveled to Washington, D.C. Brawls broke out. 4 people were stabbed. That day, John Sullivan was escorted from an event at Black Lives Matter Plaza in Washington after he was identified by activists aware of the accusations against him. That same day, James Sullivan was similarly evicted from a pro-Trump event in Washington. Participation in the 2021 Capitol attack. John Sullivan participated in the storming of the United States Capitol. He wore a ballistic vest and gas mask, entering the building through a broken window. Sullivan took extensive video, including video of the shooting of Ashley Babbitt. Sullivan could be heard saying, "Dude, this shit's gonna go viral," after Babbitt's death. Sullivan filmed himself chanting, "We about to burn this shit down," and, "We accomplished this shit. We did this together. Fuck yeah. We are all a part of this history. We gotta get this shit burned, and, it's our house, motherfuckers." He also used a megaphone and shouted support. Speaker's Lobby. Main article, Shooting of Ashley Babbitt. Outside the Speaker's lobby, Sullivan filmed himself telling others in the crowd that he has a knife. He later denied having a knife, claiming he used that to navigate myself to the front of the crowd. Upon reaching the front of the crowd, he told a law enforcement officer guarding the barricaded door, "We want you to go home. I'm recording and there's so many people and they're going to push their way up here. Bro, I've seen people out there get hurt. I don't want to see you get hurt." Public interviews. Moments after Babbitt was shot, Sullivan gave an impromptu interview with a streamer identifying as working for InfoWars. Later that night, Sullivan and Jade Sacker appeared on CNN's Anderson Cooper 360 Degrees, showing Sullivan's footage of the Babbitt shooting. Detention and FBI interview. On January 7, Sullivan was reportedly detained by D.C. Metro Police. Better source needed. On January 7, Sullivan was interviewed by FBI agents about the shooting. Sullivan said he is not affiliated with BLM or Antifa, nor with the pro-Trump crowd, although he supports Black Lives Matter. When asked about the use of Antifa hashtags in his social media posts, he rejected being associated with the group, but has stated that he, along with his group, is anti-fascist. He admitted to shouting support during the attack, but claimed he only did these things to blend in with the pro-Trump mob. His brother, James Sullivan, said that he sent the FBI tips about John Sullivan about a week after the attack. On January 13, 2021, an arrest warrant with 3 counts related to the Washington, D.C. riot was signed by a magistrate judge. The affidavit was based on work by the Counterterrorism Section of the United States Department of Justice National Security Division and the United States Attorney for the District of Columbia. The affidavit stated that Sullivan entered the Capitol's west side by climbing through a broken window. He later approached another window and a knocking noise was heard, after which it was broken. Sullivan stated, "I broke it. My bad, my apologies. Well, they already broke a window, so you know, I didn't know I hit it that hard. No one got that on camera." One charge, 40 U.S.C. Section 5104. E. 2d, is a specific crime of entering or remaining in the House of Congress without authorization. Arrest and charges. Sullivan was arrested in Tooele County, Utah, and appeared before a judge on January 15, 2021. 2 computers, 2 cell phones, and camera equipment were seized by the FBI. He was released with strict pretrial conditions. He was released as the authorities did not have sufficient proof to keep him in custody, and under the conditions that he keeps a job where he has to work full-time. Remains at home except to go to work, church or court. Only posts to social media to request jobs. Does not leave Utah and surrenders his passport to the authorities. does not work anymore with Insurgents USA, though still being allowed to handle its financial transactions and tax returns, has a mental health evaluation, does not possess firearms. Antifa conspiracy theory. For broader coverage of the conspiracy theory, see Antifa, United States Section Capitol Attack, 2021. Sullivan's involvement in the riots was cited by pro-Trump lawyer Rudy Giuliani in the Gateway Pundit as part of a conspiracy theory alleging Antifa's involvement in the riots. Giuliani published a screenshot of a message from James Sullivan reading, "I'm currently working with the FBI to expose and place total blame on John and the 226 members of Antifa that instigated the Capitol riot." Federal authorities had not identified Sullivan as a member of Antifa, and the FBI had announced on January 8 there was no evidence of Antifa involvement in the siege. BLM Utah had for months disassociated itself from Sullivan on concerns that he might be associated with the Proud Boys. Claims of being a journalist. Sullivan has called himself a citizen journalist and claimed he was at the Capitol attack only as a photojournalist. An FBI affidavit disputes the claim he was a photojournalist, as he had no press credentials. Unreliable source. Prosecutors allege that in December 2020, Sullivan publicly denied being a journalist. Sullivan's own recording is described as a first-person documentary film he released on YouTube under the title Shooting and Storming of the U.S. Capitol in Washington, D.C. J. Hoberman, a film critic writing in Art Forum, reviewed Sullivan's film, describing it as cinema as forensic evidence, and comparing it to the Zapruder film of the Kennedy assassination, while also characterizing it as a gonzo reportage. Parts of the footage were used in the second impeachment trial of Donald Trump. CNN, NBC News, Australian Broadcasting Corporation and The Washington Post were among the media outlets that paid Sullivan for his video. When entering the Capitol, Sullivan was accompanied by Jade Sacker, a Los Angeles-based independent documentary filmmaker, better source needed, who was filming John Sullivan as part of a documentary on him and his brother, James. Now, to address some issues in the previous reporting. Despite the claims of the mainstream media and John himself, he regularly purported to be a member and/or leader of Antifa and dressed in their uniform, the Black Bloc. He even produced an instructional video on how to do it. And though we wish violence would not be met with more violence, it is understood that the Proud Boys provide a barrier between malevolent Antifa counter-protesters and conservatives while they rally. And anyone who knows the style of dress and tactics employed by Antifa will see them readily appear in any footage that pertains to an event at which they gathered. Attached are self-styled clips he produced portraying him as an anarchist. Mr. Sullivan has a Rumble channel in the name of his handle JadenX, from which the long form of his video made at the Capitol on January 6 can be sourced. A highlight reel is provided by Gateway Pundit as presented, and a roughly 22-minute documentary containing outtakes from the lengthier film which proves that the majority of what occurred at the Capitol's rotunda and on its mezzanines was staged. Said explains the fact that despite his 8 charges, he was let out on house arrest only a day later. It also explains why Officer Byrd was treated with such leniency and why the most strange, contradictory and insufficient excuses were made for his choice to shoot. Please be aware that what is displayed will be upsetting to many viewers. It will be especially violent and profane, and offensive notions may arise from it as to the involvements of certain people portrayed. But we know that a particular individual made a sacrifice of her reputation and time with her family to save her country and bring us proof of our government's manipulation and suppression of its citizens. Watch and pray.